What started as a Saturday morning coffee date turned into a podcast where we chat about things like faith, family, finances, and so much more.
We're just a husband and wife living this devoted life, and we're here to help you live this devoted life too.
If you enjoy this podcast and want to help support our ministry, there are a few things you can do.
Please subscribe to this podcast, leave us a review, and share these episodes with your friends so that you can help them live this devoted life too. Welcome to another episode of This Devoted Life podcast. We are trying a little bit of a different vibe tonight. My sister, after our first episode aired, which we had our first 3 recorded prior to airing the first episode, after she watched it, she was like, I thought this was a Saturday morning coffee date. She was like, first of all, I was disappointed you didn't have coffee. And second of all, she was like, you looked way too nice. She was like, I expected you to be in like your comfy clothes. And so tonight the kids are in bed. It is 9:00 at night right now while recording this. And so we just decided we're going to go in our comfies tonight.
Yeah, and we still don't have the coffee, but at least we're going to go a little more comfy and casual.
I would like to sleep tonight, so we're not gonna do any caffeine at 9:00 at night. So I tend to be a little bit of a night owl already. I don't need like caffeine to keep me up any longer. So so we're going for a little bit of a different vibe tonight. We're in our comfy clothes and got a blanket over my lap, and we're just excited to talk to you guys again.
Yeah. So last episode we talked about dealing with fear and being brave in the world that we're living in today. And we went over several different things that we deal with as parents and we deal with as just human beings and spouses, really how to combat that in the world that we're living in. Mm-hmm. But this episode, we wanted to do more of a deep dive on how we can help our children deal with fear and not be overcome by fear or paralyzed by fear, and really to equip them to live basically a vibrant life. Yeah,
there's a lot that the world throws at our kids these days. I mean, not that every generation has had their different fears that they have had to endure, and so we just want to talk about just foundational principles that we can give to our children and provide for our children in order to be able to deal with fear when it does arise, because it's going to arise.
Oh, for sure.
Just because of the world that we live in,
Yeah, and again, it's not even necessarily our world right now. It's just, us as human beings are inundated by so many different things. And, kind of as I alluded to in episode 5 there, the fears several thousand years ago were different than the fears today. Honestly, we have relatively few, safety fears that are, I guess, validated
more physical fears.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not to say that it's any less important today than it was back then to equip ourselves.
Right.
So.
And so like the first thing we want to talk about, I'm actually going to bring up the book, The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. And obviously they were going through like the Nazi invasion and just the persecution of the Jewish people. And she, I don't know if you know a lot of her story, but she was instrumental in hiding a lot of Jews and saving their lives during that time. And one of the stories that she shares in her book, I thought was really applicable to this. And it was a story about her and her dad. They regularly took a train ride together. And it was during that time that she would ask her dad like those really hard questions, the ones that she had been mulling over for a while. And she used those opportunities to sit down with her dad, and she knew that he would always give her an honest answer. But what I thought was really cool about this is that he told her that he wasn't ready to give her an answer. But I'm going to read it to you real quick. So she had just asked him a really hard question. And it said, "He turned to look at me as he always did when answering a question, but to my surprise, he said nothing. At last he stood up, lifted his traveling case from the rack over our heads, and set it on the floor. 'Will you carry it off the train, Corrie?' he said. I stood up and tugged at it. It was crammed with watches and spare parts he had purchased that morning. 'It's too heavy,' I said. 'Yes,' he said, 'and it would be a pretty poor father who would ask his little girl to carry such a load. It's the same way, Corrie, with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you are older and stronger, you can bear it. For now, you must trust me to carry it for you.' And I was satisfied, more than satisfied, wonderfully at peace. There were answers to this and all my hard questions. For now, I was content to leave them in my Father's keeping.
Wow, that's good.
And that's so good.
It
Like
really
I
is.
mean, I get chills just reading that again because
Hmm.
as parents, we are the gatekeeper for our children, and he gave her an honest answer and she
Yep.
knew that there was an answer to her hard question, but she also knew that the answer to it was safely with her father and that
Yep.
he would give it to her when the time was
Yeah,
right.
and she trusted him.
She trusted him, and so as parents, it is our duty to be the gatekeeper for our children. We
Yep.
can't let everything through the doors. Just they are not strong enough to bear the weight of that. And so it is our duty, like he said, it would be a poor father who would just like give this all to my daughter right now.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, we're dealing with so many things that children are being exposed to at such a young age,
Hmm.
and I mean, they aren't even prepared to almost tie their shoes, and they're
Yeah.
being be asked, or they're being asked to make decisions about just so many bizarre things. And I mean, obviously, we could go down through the list. I think anyone listening to this that are living in, first quarter, almost second quarter of 2023, you can think of a lot of things that our kids are being exposed to and inundated with. But these are heavy things,
Hmm.
and they are things that we as parents need to bear their burden and not let them be weighed down by these, quote unquote decisions they need to make
Right.
or things that they're exposed to. But at the same time, we don't have to let them be fearful and, questioning either. So
Right.
there's a fine line between just bearing all their burdens and not letting them make their own decisions and exposing them to an appropriate amount of certain things at the ages that really they're a little more equipped to be
Right.
exposed to.
Well, like Corey's father said, he said, when you are stronger,
Yep.
I will then give you that burden, to carry on your own. And so as parents, it is our job to basically work that muscle for our children, to
Hmm.
teach them incrementally how to grow stronger. Like I'm not going to hand my 4-year-old 50-pound weights and say, hey, lift this,
Right.
like
Yeah.
she's going to
I
grow.
mean, that would be impressive, but
That would be impressive. But
yeah.
no, we're gonna like if I am wanting to strengthen her, which we are not like saying that we're going to have our 4-year-old lifting weights, but her body needs
Yeah.
time
Yep.
to grow physically
Hmm.
and then even like muscularly. Like if I am wanting to get into better shape, I'm not going to go and grab 40-pound weights right now.
Yep.
I'm going to start with 10s, 15s, possibly 20s, like depending on where I'm at in my
Hmm.
fitness journey. But that's the same with just these heavy things that kids are having to carry right now and things that are burdensome and things that are fearful because they don't know how to process it. So as parents, we are the gatekeeper. We are the ones who are behind the lines. We're helping them to learn, to grow. We're teaching them how to think, how to process. And it's really cool.
Yeah, and to use that biblical lens when they are thinking through these
Hmm.
things and trying to process them. And again, I mean, our kids are quite young, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be hiding God's word in their heart and
Hmm.
just, laying that foundation. Obviously, we're not going to over spiritualize everything and make it sound like, oh, you have this decision to make.
Hmm.
You're 2.5, you're going to turn 3 in September, but
Yeah.
you have to go through this biblical decision making process. Like, no, obviously, you just start with the simple things. But our 10-year-old is asking
Hmm.
very interesting questions,
Yep.
and yeah, I
And we're
mean,
able to we're able to give him a little bit more information than we would our 4-year-old because he is able to carry a heavier weight now. He is able to. We've taught him how to discern, how
hmm
to filter things, like you said, through a biblical lens.
hmm
And so his muscle is getting a little stronger. And in order to continue to strengthen that, we do have to let more and more through that gate to strengthen him.
yeah, yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mentioned the kind of phrase "reverse engineer" in episode 3, I think it was. That what can we be doing now to strengthen our children for when it is their time to carry that burden?
Yes.
And those are things that we try to think about, what they're going to be exposed to, as a teenager and as a young adult, and kind of think back or reverse engineer back to today,
Mhm.
and again, not overthink it and overanalyze, but I guess, do you have anything off the top of your head that we are doing today that are equipping them?
Well, I think like the first thing that we as parents can do is to emulate what to do during fearful times.
Yeah.
Actually, I have another book. It's called Mothering by the Book, and it's by Jennifer Pepito, who's the owner of the Peaceful Press. But the subcaption on it is The Power of Reading to Overcome Fear and Recapture Joy. But there is a part in here where it's talking about how Charles and Caroline Ingalls, I mean, they traveled so much, like they moved from state to state, and there were so many times when they went through some like really scary stuff, like literally
Hmm.
like physical wolves were outside their house,
Yeah.
and like when we say that they're outside the house, like these were like small little cabins that they had built that had no real windows in it,
Hmm.
and I mean, there were times where they were going without food for long periods of time, or like had very meager supplies. But, if you read through that series, you see Caroline where she is playing games with her children when she's fearful. Or she's singing a song, or she's just going about her work. But she's teaching her children in those moments how to handle fear. And
Right.
so her children were looking at her. And I really liked what Jennifer said in this book. In this part, the train did not come while they were out there, so they knew that their supplies were going to be really low for the
Hmm.
winter. And it said Laura had been watching her parents, learning from the way they had navigated hardship, and now she was taking their cue. She was going to step up with them and push through the looming threat of starvation and stay cheerful for the sake of the younger children. Together, Ma and Pa and Laura and Mary were going to turn away from complaining and let a song of hope proceed from their mouths. So, what had happened just prior to that is when they found out that the train was not going to come, rather than complain
Hmm.
or to fret or to worry, it said that Ma began to sing softly to Grace while she undressed her for bed, and Laura joined in the song.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's just so powerful just to see that Caroline was setting an example for her children of peace,
Yep.
and just was showing that even in the midst of something that could potentially be very scary, she had an inner peace that she was teaching her children what to do during hard times.
Right.
And
Yep.
so, we as parents can emulate that for our children. Like, what are we doing when we're feeling afraid?
Hmm.
Are we complaining? Are we not going about our daily tasks because the weight of fear is like keeping us just trapped? And so how we view and treat fear or fearful times really does teach our children
It does.
what to do when fear arises.
Yeah, and we can't put our lives on hold. When something comes up, we do. And again, you don't put on a false security or
Right.
things like that. Obviously, you have to, get the job done. And obviously, Pa and Ma Ingalls, went to work that next day
Right.
and preparing for that hardship
But
and
you're
things like
teaching your
that. And
children where your true security
for
lies
sure.
in
Yep.
that moment.
Yep.
It's that heavenly peace that comes with that.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, no, it's very good, and again, good leadership. Also, that we keep the highs a little bit lower and the lows a lot higher, and
Mhm.
just be that consistent, just reaffirming voice
Yeah.
in your children's minds and hearts and lives, and just encourage them, and teach them through all of these moments. It's
Right.
not that we can keep the hardships at bay, but we can actually use them for good.
Right. Yeah. And it's not that we are saying that, you have to, I don't know, be naive to fear,
Right, yeah,
because there are hard things that we're going to go
for
through.
sure.
But it's just how you face those fears, I
Mhm.
think is what we're going towards here.
Yeah, totally. So, You actually attended an expo or a conference one time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, so I think another thing that we can do as parents, like
yep,
we're trying to get down to like the practical things. What can we practically do as
yes,
parents? And I went to a great homeschool convention years ago, and I got to hear Andrew Pudawa
okay, yep,
speak,
yep,
and it was on the importance of children's literature, like good children's literature. And what he talked about in that was that through stories, you can teach your children bravery. You can teach them to discern what is good and what is evil,
hmm
and you can teach them that good will overcome evil. So, like if you look at all of like your classic fairy tales, in those fairy tales, there's always the good, and then there's always the evil, and the
hmm
good always conquers the evil. Now, that line has gotten blurred in children's literature
it has,
today, and I think it really emulates what's going on in our world where it's harder to see what good and evil really is,
yep,
and so I it really is just so important, like reading good literature with our children and giving them stories of heroism, stories where someone, even though they're afraid to do something, they do the right thing, even though it was the hard
yes,
decision.
yep,
And it teaches them to be brave in the face of hardship, in the face of danger. It teaches them to be heroes, and it gives them someone to root for and someone to emulate,
yeah, yep,
And what I love about these classic children's literature is just that it really is a depiction of biblical principles
hmm
because good does overcome
it
evil,
does,
you
yeah. I
know?
mean, Philippians 2:10 says that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow of things in heaven, things in earth, things under the earth, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And so we know the end of our story
Mhm.
here on earth, but yeah, I mean, stories are so, so powerful.
They
Yeah.
really are. And so it is I think it's something that we can be very purposeful in is
hmm
in choosing really good children's literature where there are heroes, like
Yes,
people to root for, people that we want our children to emulate. And it teaches them too to discern between good and evil too.
very
Like,
much
why
so.
are we rooting for this guy? Because
hmm
he's good. Like, obviously, like characters in books are flawed, right? They all have their weaknesses because
hmm
they're human. And that's what makes the stories more relatable. But it also is just like, oh, I can be that person,
Yeah.
and it gives
Yep.
our children something to be like, rah, like I got this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So children's literature is definitely a really great starting point for teaching our children during these younger years and giving them something to root for.
Yeah, so stories is a great one. Obviously, equipping them with scripture
Hmm.
is a very important one, and even the Bible stories as well.
Oh
Obviously,
yeah.
some of the early Old Testament can get kind of gory, and
Right, right.
and stuff like that. We're reading through the Bible chronologically right now, but you just mentioned like us being flawed as humans.
Mhm.
Moses didn't get to enter the Promised Land because of the things, the leadership flaws that he
Right.
had,
Oh, and
but
he
he
was
still made an incredible impact and literally led the children of Israel out of Egypt.
Yeah, he had so many fears. Like when God
Right?
met him in that burning bush,
Yep.
he was like, I can't do this, Lord. Like, I can't speak before Pharaoh. I'm a timid man. I
hmm
can't do this. And God's like, no, I've chosen you. I've called you to this, and you
Yep.
can do this.
Yeah, and he was willing.
He was willing, and then he even gave him his brother Aaron to like go with him. And so it
Yes,
just was really cool how God equips us when he has called us.
very
And
much
so like
so.
reading those stories from the Bible even, it's like that gives our children just a true picture of who God is, and that it shows our children that when he has called us to do something,
hmm
he will be with us and he will equip us, and you cannot fail when you're doing the will of God.
Yeah, yep. So again, just the stories of literature, stories in the Bible, and then also, truly. hiding God's word in
Mhm.
their heart with specific verses. And there's a bunch of them. So we encourage you to go and do your own research and to find verses that resonate with you. And if they resonate with you, then it's likely that they'll resonate with your children, and you'll be able to grow together. But a couple that we jotted down here is Psalm 56:3 says, "What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee." That was actually one that my mom shared with me a
Mm.
lot. Kind of as you're going to bed as a little child, and your mind, there's just so many things that go through your mind that so you just you pray and you just quote scripture
Mm.
and use that to combat those fears. And then Isaiah 41:10 says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." So
So
again,
good.
yeah, just
So
knowing
good.
that God is there for us, and that
Yeah.
He's not only there for us, but He's there with us, and
Mhm.
that He will uphold us.
Yeah, we've definitely used that with our children. Like you said, it is kind of the before bedtime, there always seems to be like questions or fears or like just that really deep thinking
Yeah.
before bed. And those are a couple of verses that we have used with our children before bed and just speaking scripture over them
Yep.
and giving them something to recall when times they are afraid and you're not there to speak it over them.
Yep.
They've now hidden it in their heart and they can recall it themselves and speak the truth over themselves.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Obviously, teaching them to pray, teaching them
Hmm.
to seek godly counsel. Again, like you said, we're not going to be with them all the
Right.
time. So whether or not they're by themselves and they need to come to you, or maybe they're out with friends, or
Yeah.
just at school or wherever,
Yeah.
and maybe there's a godly person that is near them that they can seek out and confide in,
Right.
um, you know, things like
Yeah,
that.
prayer is a habit. It's if we have not taught our children to go to God in prayer,
Right,
it's not going to be an instinctual thing,
right.
because I mean, I still need to work on my prayer life.
Yeah,
It's like how many times am I like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe I've got all this to do," and I'm starting to fret or I'm starting to complain and it's like I should have just stopped and taken that to God in prayer, right?
mhm,
And
yep,
so I think our kids need to see that, and then we can do that for them. Where if they're being afraid or there's something going on, we can stop and say, "Hey, let's pray about this together." And
yep.
then when they're now alone, they can stop and pray, because they've seen it emulated.
Yeah, I think that actually also does or shows them that we don't always have the answers either. So
Right.
just because they don't have the answer to that situation, or they don't feel confident in that
Mhm.
situation, they know that we seek the Lord
Yeah.
in our trying times, or our times of, the unknown per se, and then it encourages them to do the same.
Right. And then those scriptures that you mentioned, like it talked about how God is with them and that he will uphold them. And so when they have that truth in their heart, they will be more likely to bring it to God because they're like, wait, he's got my back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And he does.
He does. Yeah.
Yeah. So another one too that I think we need to teach our children is teach them the difference between healthy and unhealthy
Yes.
fears, because there are a lot of unhealthy fears that Satan tries to divert us from the task at hand, tries to distract us from, just the living the Christian life,
Hmm.
and really just tries to scare us. And if anything, make us kind of curl up and you want to just stay in bed, pull the covers over
Right.
our head and stay in bed.
Yeah.
And so those are. There are so many unhealthy fears, but there are also healthy fears. Again, there's a book, and I haven't read it, but I've heard it suggested many times, and it's the title of it is "The Gift of Fear,"
Okay.
and that book focuses on healthy fears. So, and it's mostly about just personal safety and personal security and being aware
Right.
of
Like if our kids are walking alone at night, that
exactly.
is a healthy fear because it heightens your senses, you're paying more attention.
Yep.
Like that is like a fear that God has put inside of us. It's an instinctual
Yeah,
fear.
it truly is a
Yeah.
gift that
Yeah.
He's given us.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I think some of those unhealthy fears that you're kind of referring to is like the fear of missing out. Like there's FOMO, where it's like we live in a society that is so steeped in social media that
Hmm.
it's really easy to feel like we're going to miss out on things. And so we kind of hyper focus on what we aren't doing rather than being thankful for what we are doing.
Right. Yeah. And those are actually, you mentioned FOMO. That those are some fears that we should expose our kids to.
Yeah.
So there's a few that we jotted down here. And um, basically, the fear of suffering
Hmm.
is one that we should let our kids suffer a little bit. Again, in a controlled way. But almost everything in life worth doing and worth accomplishing, it takes a little bit of suffering,
Hmm.
and it takes some grit and some hard work to
Hmm.
get through. So if we protect our kids from experiencing any hardship,
Right.
then they won't grow
Right.
in the ways that they should.
Right. And when you're referring to the fear of suffering, like you're even talking about just physical
Yeah.
suffering. Like I don't want to go out and mow the lawn, or I don't want to go out and chop this wood
Hmm.
because that's hard, and it's
Yeah.
like no, you're exposing them to that because that is a fear of suffering. Like they don't
Right.
want to do it because it's hard, but if you can incrementally grow that muscle to where that's now easy,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and we use a lot of simple analogies because our kids are very young. So obviously, if you have kids that are teenagers, there's numerous things that you can think of as we're giving these simple analogies. Or maybe you're a grandparent and your grandchildren are real young. You can help your child help with parenting, things like that. But the fear of suffering is one. The fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
Failure is a word that I don't really use because not that I'm all touchy feely about certain words, but I mean, unless I'm dead, I still have life and
Yes.
breath to work on things. So, that might have been something that a path that I figured out won't work in
Right.
my life, but it's now an opportunity to find the path that does
Yeah.
work. So,
Well, I laugh
um,
because like you listen to Jocko Willink quite
yeah,
a bit,
I do.
and it's like, oh, hey, you failed today? Good.
Good,
Good.
good,
Like
yes.
that's good because that means you learned something and you tried something,
Very
and
much.
like if you hadn't have tried it, you would have never known, you'd have never grown.
Very
And
much
yeah.
so. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So, fear of suffering, fear of failure. Let your kids fail fast, fail early, fail often in
Mhm.
small ways. We went to the ice rink, a few weeks ago, or probably a couple months ago now, and I tell our kids to. I want you to fall 20 times before we leave here today.
I'm pretty certain you told me that while we were learning to ski recently too. You were like, you just need to fall.
I
Like, you
did.
just need to fall and
I
fall
did.
hard. And I was like, no, I don't want to.
Yeah, but it teaches you your breaking
It
point,
does.
and if you aren't falling or quote unquote failing, then you aren't learning your breaking point or the edge of your abilities, but you probably aren't trying hard enough either. And so that's the same in life, where if our kids are succeeding at everything, that probably means that they're not pushing themselves
Right.
hard enough, or maybe we're not pushing hard
Yeah.
enough.
And when they do fail,
Hmm.
they're going to be like, oh, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
They haven't learned to pick themselves up and to push through that
Yeah, but
again.
but
Yeah.
if they're failing at a young age, and often, honestly, and you're there to help them through it,
Yes.
then it's so much easier than waiting until they go out into the real world and
Hmm.
fail, and then those failures and those just issues that they run into in their lives can be a lot bigger, or will be a lot bigger than when they're 4 years old
Mm,
and, trying to tie their shoes or, put on some ice skates and go out
right.
at the ice rink.
Yeah, I know our 10-year-old has come up to me a few times and he's like, I did so bad today, in baseball or whatever. And I'm like, did you try?
Hmm.
He's like, well, of course I tried. And I'm like, good, then you didn't fail.
Right.
Like, I just like, did you try your best? That's
Hmm.
all I wanted to hear. And then I'm proud of you.
Yep.
Like, provided you are trying and failing, like, I could not be more proud of you.
Yeah. And I personally love it that or when kids do want to win and do want to
Yeah.
succeed and things like that because if they lose that competitive spirit and edge then they uh, maybe they won't push themselves hard enough and then we will have to push
Yeah.
them a little
They
harder
become
and
apathetic.
yeah, and again, it's not, sports or whatever, like just in life in general. Like I don't care if my child is amazing at baseball or softball or whatever, but I do want them to try
Mhm.
at things that they enjoy and push themselves.
Yeah.
Again, not have that fear of suffering or fear of failure. Another one is that fear of missing out, the
Mhm.
FOMO. I say often be thankful for what you do have, not unthankful or focused on what you don't have. And that honestly is a big gratefulness, thankfulness is a huge part of life. And if we do focus on what we don't have, or that fear of missing out, or what are my friends doing tonight? I'm not with them, and they're going here, and so's doing this, and it's like we have so many blessings that God has bestowed upon us, and that it's just don't worry about the little things and let your kids miss out on a few things because maybe next time they can organize that event or
Right.
be more proactive. Or maybe sometimes it's good that they're not with their friends doing a certain thing because maybe it wasn't the best choices or the
Right.
best event that they should have attended. So those are some, soft fears, let's call them,
Mhm.
and the kind of unreal fears and the things that are really unhealthy in their
Mhm.
life, not the good, healthy fears that they should be aware
Mhm.
of and they should take stock in, but also proceed in life with the help of God and with the help of us as parents.
Yeah, coming back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, where it was like we need to emulate how to handle that, even in these like quote unquote soft fears. How, as homeschoolers, we talk about being a lifelong learner and
Hmm.
like showing children that even as an adult, I'm still trying new things, I'm still failing, I'm
Yep.
still picking myself back up. Like I'm trying to learn how to play the cello, which is an insanely hard instrument as a 36-year-old woman. My coordination skills are not as good as they once were. And, but I'm showing my children that I am still learning something. I'm still growing
Yeah,
as
you're
a
pushing
person. I'm
yourself.
pushing myself
Yep.
and I'm not afraid to fail at it,
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yeah. So again, the younger you can expose them to those fears, and the more that you can encourage them. I've used the word push, several times in this podcast. It's really more of an encouragement
mhm.
and just that nudge that they need. But I've been using an analogy for probably a couple decades. I mean, honestly, well before we had kids, but when you're driving through maybe a new construction site or past a new facility and you see a bunch of trees that are planted and they're maybe the trunks are an inch or two in diameter, they have those supports, whether it's some stakes or some posts around them with
Like the
some,
ropes that come
yep,
down.
the guy
Yeah.
wires there, and that gives them support
Mhm.
and it keeps them straight, growing straight. It keeps them, standing through a storm,
Mhm.
the winds that blow, and things like that. But if you leave those on for years and years and years, they'll be dependent on those stakes in that support. And the root system will be extremely shallow. So if or when those supports are either taken away after too long, or they rot out and they fall apart and don't give support anymore, then the first storm that comes through with that shallow root system, that tree will tip over and
Mhm.
it'll be displaced, and it could be catastrophic depending on how big that tree is. But if we don't put any guides on those
It's
trees,
gonna grow crooked. It's
yeah,
not gonna, yeah, it's not gonna
it'll be
grow healthy.
yes, very unhealthy and things like that. So it's put those supports, put those guides up in your children's lives, but then little by little expose them to the things that they are able to carry.
Mhm.
Those burdens that they're able to
Let
carry.
them
And
weather some storms with
yes.
you. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. With you by their side, but remove those supports and guides at a reasonable pace. And then their root system, that taproot will go down, the root system will get big, and they'll be able to weather those storms. And even if, they sway and bend and things like that throughout their teenage years and their early 20s, that root system will keep them grounded and will keep them upright, and they'll likely come around eventually at worst case scenario. But optimally, they'll really just thrive throughout all
Yeah.
of those storms that life throws at them.
I
So
always love a really good word picture, and that one is just so good because
yeah,
it gives you a visual example of what we're trying to do as parents. Like, we're trying to support our children and set them on a good trajectory, and
yep,
then slowly we're removing some of that influence and allowing them to be exposed to different elements,
yeah, yeah.
and yeah, that'll preach.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah. So honestly, yeah, that's essentially a wrap on the things that we had to share as part of this
Mhm.
podcast. But obviously, you would probably have numerous examples or ideas or things like that that maybe you could share with us. So we would love to hear from you as the community, and maybe we can share those in a future
Yeah.
podcast
Like,
or
what are you doing today to help your children grow? And especially those of you who are in the later parenting years, if you can share some things that you're doing with your preteens and your teenagers,
Mhm.
that you're slowly allowing them to be exposed to different things and giving them more responsibility and more luggage to carry,
Yeah.
going back to that Corey Ten Boom story. But yeah, if you want to share that with us, just so that we can share it with the community and give support to those who are listening, we would love to hear some of the things that you are doing. You can contact us at podcast@thisdevotedlife.com, or you can leave us a comment.
Yep.
And yeah,
Ask us a few questions. I mean, if you don't have anything, but a couple things that we said, maybe spark some questions that you have for us. Obviously, we'd love to help in any way that we can.
yeah,
So,
definitely. So until then, we just want to encourage you to seek God, love your spouse, hug your kids, and stay devoted. Thank you for tuning in to This Devoted Life podcast with James and Shanda. We appreciate your support in sharing biblical, uplifting truths with the world. If you found value in this episode, please leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us to improve the show, and we'd love to hear from you. Be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more about how to live a life devoted to God and family, head over to thisdevotedlife.com. You can also follow me, Shanda, on Instagram at devoted_motherhood. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time on This Devoted Life podcast.